To welcome you then to talking about bureaucracy while embracing an entrepreneurial spirit. The origin of this goes back to the January conferences when we talked about Futocracy and got into some specifics with Effectuation. This is a continuation of that from an entrepreneurial side, but put within some greater context. So let's talk about what we're going to be covering today. First, we're going to talk about why startups go from an entrepreneurship mentality to bureaucracy. This is a key issue because all organizations struggle with bureaucracy and want to become more entrepreneurial, but there's a natural tendency away from that type of spirit that you have in startups. And I'll give you a hint and it'll come clear later. And it's really about control in many ways. Then we're going to be talking more about effectuation. This is the principles that support the entrepreneurial spirit, which is really the energized startup. And this is a theory of what differentiates successful entrepreneurs from those who are not quite as successful. And when you get into it, we're going to have many ways to see how to actually use these concepts within even mature organizations. In particular, we're going to go into effectuation and how it connects with Futocracy in action. This is designing organizations that are built for change, which is the whole focus of what Reg and I have been working on for the last few years. Turning then to why do entrepreneurial organizations become bureaucratic? That's a key question. We can all say that the entrepreneurial that is agile and growing is something that we all want. And at the same time, we find that bureaucracy is slow and stagnating. It is bad. But mature organizations continue to fight with bureaucracy while saying they want to be more entrepreneurial. The key then is if people see bureaucracy as frustrating, why do entrepreneurial startups go from that type of mentality to being bureaucratic? This is an evolution that normally happens. We need to discover why it happens. And once we understand that, we can then start to address how to keep it from happening or how to go back to a more entrepreneurial mindset. Then we're talking about the entrepreneurial turning to bureaucracy. Why does this evolution happen? Let's go back to how startups form. Their initial structure is basically a hub and spoke type of structure where there is a key centralized decision point. This may be a single individual, a few people, or a small team. But again, it is a tightly controlled focus on who is controlling the primary decisions, and they surround them with competent people then to move their vision forward. That is a typical hub and spoke structure. That can then also be drawn into a very simple hierarchy of 2 layers. When we then go forward with maturing, additional people are hired into the organization. And as they're hired, the traditional organization chart starts to form by adding hierarchical levels. These levels then allow the empowerment of authority and decision-making to be pushed down into the organization, but from a limited perspective. And this is where the challenge to bureaucracy starts to have its deep roots, in that the decision-making authority is devolved down into the organization hierarchies, but at the same time, it's not totally distributed or let free within those levels. There is still some limited control, such that while the lower levels of organization do have some decision-making authority, it is normally constrained, and it has also some strings attached to it, such that the people at the lower levels don't have complete confidence that they are truly in control of the decision authority that they may have. In which case, if there's any question as to, is it the right decision, or there's some confusion as to possible directions, there's an easy out to bump that decision back up the hierarchy versus making it themselves. This sets up the bureaucratic passing the buck up the organization and not making decision, or to postpone decisions that are begging to be made based upon pressures on the organization. The key then is that bureaucracy is somewhat normal then with growth, but that normacy comes when there's an emphasis on control. The key then is, how do you gain some control? What's the limits of control without setting up an expectation for bureaucracy to start to take place? Moving then from entrepreneurial growth, let's take a look at some of the principles of effectuation. This, again, is the theory of successful entrepreneurship. What makes them successful? The challenge then is how to grow without losing control and still be quick and flexible. That's the objective that we want to accomplish. This is keeping the entrepreneurial spirit alive and not letting bureaucracy take a deep root. This gets into what makes entrepreneurs truly entrepreneurial and how can we maintain that spirit. What I'm going to be talking about here, again, is effectuation, and I'm going to be drawing my material from the Society of Effectual Control, which is housed at the University of Virginia. The University of Virginia has done much research on this over the years, and this particular document is a great summary of what the key principles of effectuation are. Going into these principles, I'm going to present them as to what is effectuation, but I'm also going to compare it to causation thinking, which is the normal thinking. When you get into most organization, it's a causation approach with minor pockets of effectual thinking. But for the most part, the necessity of a startup requires effectuation. Once that necessity diminishes, then causation thinking starts to set into place. So we're going to place these in contrast to each other so that you can see the difference between effectuation and causation, and thereby gain a better understanding of how to move or keep the effectuation primary. The key part of effectuation is you start with the means to determine the goals. This is a critical shift in mindset, and that you do what you can now. A causation approach, on the other hand, is what we're normally used to, where we start with a goal and then we determine what requirements and resources are needed to accomplish that goal. So for example, in most planning, you start with the goal in mind and then you put together the plan to secure the necessary resources to move forward with that plan. That's causation. Effectuation flips that and starts with what you can do with what you have right now. So let's talk about baseball. If you have a baseball mitt and a bat, you have the foundations for a baseball game. However, if you want to have a baseball game from a causation point of view, you have to have not only that, but you have to have multiple mitts, at least the one bat and the one ball, but you also need 18 players. You need 17 more players than yourself. So that if you're going to do an objective or a goal of a baseball game, you identify all the equipment and the people that are involved and you go and secure them. On the other hand, a approach using effectuation flips it around. It sees how many people there are, how they're equipped, and then decides what can be done. If it's only one person, you can basically throw the ball up in the air and catch it yourself. If there's two, you play a game of catch. If there's a few people, you might play a diminished game of baseball where the batter rotates in and out of the field. So you're able to modify the game that you actually play based upon the resources you have available to you, so that it is really a point of view on, do you wait till you have all the resources, or do you do what you can with what you have now? That's the key of effectuation. This also then gets past the point of delays, the problems of not acquiring resources, the issue even of decisions as to what you can do because you're short the necessary resources. So this is a key component of how effectuation is different from causation. A second key difference is the issue of partnerships and how you combine your activity with others. This is done for speed. It's also done for more opportunities. And to some extent, you form partnerships because you may not necessarily have the resources yourself. Hire does this regularly, in that instead of building their own resources, they partner with other organizations, spreading the risk, but also somewhat diminishing the opportunities, but they're still able to move forward much quicker because they're able to take advantage of the resources from the partners. A causation approach really focuses more on going it alone and building internal capabilities. Same as the causation in the first bullet point, you wait until you're able to do it yourself versus finding the necessary shortcuts on getting where you want to be as quick as you can. In this case, you form partnerships. These partnerships may be operational in that you're using them to do current activities, or they can even be more strategic for research and development, brainstorming ideas, such that you're able to leverage the knowledge and abilities of other organizations beyond what you can do yourself, and thereby establish even more opportunities going forward in the future. So this is a key difference on how you think about resourcing through partnerships or yourself. There's also a key issue on control itself. Effectuation focuses on what you can control. It ignores what you cannot control, at least to the point that it doesn't worry excessively about what you cannot control. The mindset of effectuation is that the future is made. It is not found nor predicted, it is made, and it is the action that you take now that makes the future. This is a very entrepreneurial mindset, but again, it's also one that can be retained within the organization if a conscious effort is made such that you're always thinking about what you can do now, make in the future, and not waiting for others to act or worrying about what others may do or what you cannot do yourself. These are the first three key principles of effectuation. Additional effectuation gets down to the risk-taking itself. Okay. This is the level of risk that you're willing to take, and effectuation takes as much risk up until and no further than what they determine to be a, quote, affordable loss. An affordable loss is that the worst outcome is acceptable. If you can accept the worst possibility, you move forward. Causation doesn't take that at all. Causation is a risk management approach focusing on return on investment. You're taking action only if the risk can be reduced and there's constant effort to reduce risk. So let's put this into a hospital situation. If you're taking a risk that might put you into the hospital for a few days and you're willing to tolerate that possible risk, that's an acceptable or an affordable risk from your point of view. However, if that risk is death, that is obviously a non-affordable loss, such that you make a determination as to the degree of risk and you make a decision on accepting that risk based upon the acceptability or the affordability and not necessarily the probability. And this is where it gets into some critical things. So for example, if you were doing a risk management approach on an ROI, the risk of death may actually have a very small probability and be weighted that way, in which case a mature organization may actually be taking more risk that has very low probability, where an entrepreneurial mindset won't take that risk because they couldn't afford the loss. This allows you to then keep moving quicker, but also accept risks to a limit that is affordable to the organization, that does not risk the entire survivability of the organization. Okay. We also talk about the fifth part of entrepreneurship, which is embracing surprise, the learning and using that knowledge. We talk about wanting to do this all the time, but for all practicality, in a causation approach, you're always working to establish some stability and some certainty. You're not embracing the unknown. The entrepreneurial mindset really looks at the unknown as something that may be out there, but you're not going to worry about it until you start to sense what's occurring, and then you act upon the knowledge as you receive it. And to the extent that you learn something, then you're able to incorporate that and possibly reverse course, in which case an entrepreneurship is never locked into place. Just because it was decided doesn't mean you can't undecide when more information becomes available. So you now then have an ability to truly look and learn that's embedded within the organization and not something that is treated as an add-on for knowledge management. The key then is you're looking at the means, you're looking at how you partner to build upon resources and knowledge that you may not have. You're looking at the risk-taking, how you learn, and basically how it all comes together then in what you might say is an entrepreneurial mindset. Let's then turn into implementing this. How do you put this into place, or how do you keep it from dissipating to bureaucracy going forward? The key then is, how do you embed effectuation principles into an organization? The principles then provide a foundation for self-organization. And this is a key part of what we get into a lot on principles. In a highly directive organization, all of the criteria for decision-making and authority comes from above and provides a very rigid framework. And to the extent that you have some stability and routine, that framework for decision-making is adequate. However, to the extent that exceptions are occurring, which you have to admit are happening all the time and probably increasingly so, to the extent that you're dealing with exceptions, those directives often are insufficient to guide decision-making, thereby creating additional feedback loops up in the organization requiring more directives. This then gets into more policies, procedures, and the directives become even more cumbersome, and with that comes bureaucracy. The key then is, how do you put principles in place such that the principles and not closely defined directives define the decision-making process and the boundaries for those decisions. This allows then self-organization to occur across the organization without frequent input up and down the hierarchy. Futocracy is the avenue we're going to be talking about here, and that is designing organizations that are built for change. The principles then are structural. We're going to be talking about a 3-level organization that really embraces effectuation, and I'll show the different touch points for how effectuation is implemented within this 3 level. And it's not hierarchical level, they're functional level. That's a key difference. We're also going to be talking about operating style principles. These are specific to the inclusion of effectuation within these principles. Looking at Futocracy, then, this is the 3-level structure. Again, it's not a linkage that you might see within a traditional organization. These are bi-directional functional linkages. I've written a white paper that gets into detail of the DAC, the direction, alignment, and commitment. And to a large extent, these 3 functions align such that you've got a level 1, which is the work teams. That's where you focus on getting commitment for the work among those people. Level 2 is in the middle. It was purpose alignment. This is the alignment of the A in DAC. And the 3rd level is the executive, which sets the direction, such that within this 3-level hierarchy, you're dealing with the 3 functional points that you occur in any leadership model. And DAC is, in fact, a high-level leadership model that can be implemented by people or structurally within the system itself. Let's look then in more detail at level 1. This is a networked collaborative work units, which might be called micro enterprises as in the higher group organization. Within the level 1, we have a devolved decision-making that focuses on actions that are controllable. And again, this is where the actions that are controllable falls into place from effectuation, so that you have the decision-making that is across that entire operational level, and they're taking actions that are controllable within the means that they have there. Again, they're using the means that they have available to them at that particular part of the organization, and they're supplementing those means with operating partners, such that at the level 1, then you're tying specifically into 3 points of effectuation. A 4th and 5th level then comes in the risk that is affordable. Those operating units are making independent decisions that are within their means, using operating partners, taking risks themselves, but they're also learning. They're not just continuing to do what they've been doing, they continue to focus and expand their operations as it relates to their assigned purpose. This then brings into the 2nd level, purpose alignment. To the extent that each level 1 organization is moving forward and is purpose driven, there is some necessity then to align all of that level 1 organization across the organization within a network that is totally aligned to the holistic organizational alignment, such that you have then an internal checks and balance system. The level 1 organization is trying to expand and do what they can within their means and their purpose as they see it, but they're restrained to some extent by how that purpose is defined and how it is connected to others that are networked internal to the organization. The network weaving then is a critical component on creating internal co-creation partnerships. The value chain is broken up through the different parts of the level 1 organization, but you also have staff organizations serving internal customers, such that every operating unit within that level 1 is truly customer facing, whether it be an external customer or an internal customer. And to the extent that they are tightly connected, any change in visibility to their customer is rippled throughout the organization. And to some extent, if there becomes a conflict or an opportunity that may be evolving, the purpose alignment team can then step in and identify that, clarify that, and put some additional network weaving in place to move forward. The level 3 then is an executive level. It is a purpose setting level, but it is also a point of contact for external stakeholders. This is often a legal requirement, and it's really kind of the external face of the organization, but they're no longer doing decisions at this level. They are no longer thinking about the operations. They're looking at a much bigger purpose. They're also looking at external partnerships and coalitions. When you look at this, then the partnership is all 3 levels. You've got a level 1 operating partners working together, both internal and external. Level 2 is network weaving, identifying additional partnership opportunities internally. But then you've also got the executives that are setting up the bigger strategic partnerships externally, such that you've got multiple points of where effectuation is actively involved in the operation of this 3-level organization structure. The totality then is somewhat of an autonomous unit, but it also allows each part to do functionally something that is different. What often happens in an organization that becomes bureaucratic is that it gets pulled down into the rabbit hole of doing firefighting. They know they should be thinking big picture. They know they should be looking at the issues of how to correct and how to improve, but that gets pulled aside as they do firefighting. In this particular way, you really eliminate that because level 2 remains consistent at the alignment to the extent that a problem that is causing a fire at the level 1, they then approach the solution to that problem. They don't necessarily fight the fire, which is being done at level 1. The executives often are down into the details of an organization. This structure requires them to rethink what they do and focus on the bigger picture. You then have different parts of the organization functioning different, such that no key function is lost. Alignment remains in place. The purpose setting direction remains in place, but then you also have the people that are focused on the work itself. The organization then, as it goes from an entrepreneurial hub and spoke into a larger organization, then evolves functionally, not from a delegation or empowerment approach, such that when let's say an entrepreneurial startup from a hub and spoke, to the extent that you start to grow, that hub then doesn't remain a key decision-making point. That hub shifts back and starts thinking about purpose alignment and purpose setting at the executive level, such that the operations then start to become more independent and operate on their own. And that core person that would have been at the hub then focuses more on alignment and direction. As the organization continues to grow, there then becomes an opportunity to then split the 2 and 3 level into an executive level and a purpose alignment level, such that growth then doesn't become by adding people that are delegated authority. Growth comes through how you think about the way the organization needs to be organized to get work accomplished, not from control. This brings us back to what is your growth objective? All organizations that grow have some objective in that growth. By default, most organizations grow through a command and control structure, and they make a number of decisions to remain in control. If you're growing a plant in your hand, that is very much of a controlled situation. You can control the amount of light it gets, the amount of water it gets, the amount of soil it gets, and it is readily at hand per se. However, if you were to design that growth for more capacity to deliver the organization's purpose, having that plant in your hand is ridiculous. You want to have thousands of plants in the field growing independently. You lose some control over the amount of light it gets. You lose some control over bad weather. You lose some control over the amount of rain or drought that you may be facing. But you expand the capacity. This then gets into a key thought of, are you building the organization for control purposes, or are you building it to deliver the organization's purpose? This gets back again to the amount of bureaucracy you're going to be willing to tolerate, and to the degree you're going to have entrepreneurial spirit driving your organization. That completes this. I will now open it up for questions. And to the extent that something comes up, we can then get into more detail later. Okay, Reg, you've been following some of the chats, and anything you want to jump in while I catch up on the chat?
There's one comment, where is it, from Joseph, that Futocracy supports a shared economy from what he can see. Joseph, could you tell us what does a shared economy mean for you, just so that we're talking about the same thing? You can switch your mic on. There's no need to type.
Okay, that was Joseph. Oop.
Yeah.
Joseph just blanked out. Oh, there he is. Wait. Give me a second here. Okay, let me see.
So it looks as if he's unmuted and remuted and unmuted, and he's challenging. Can you hear my voice?
I do. I can hear yours. Yeah, no problem.
All right, because I was wondering if Joseph, just try speaking.
There you are.
Is this better?
Yes, go ahead.
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, so it took that I had to open up the lid of my laptop. So
yeah, sometimes that shuts it all down. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really find this topic extremely exciting, to say the least. What I mean by that is I'm approaching this from an information technology and a technology perspective, where there's a lot of outsourcing that has occurred. Okay. And in the process of outsourcing, you lose so much control over what you're doing. So in some regards, why are we in this mode of outsourcing per se, or business process outsourcing, or cloud, or whatever it is? You want to put the label on it. They all make some sort of sense. Is for the purposes of cost savings and being more efficient. And to some degree, hopefully they get a balance between efficiency and effectiveness. But I find Futocracy supports that model more, because now the organization itself, in some regards, becomes a little bit more virtual. So much that is shared. So you have these individual units that focus on a piece of work, whatever that piece of work is. And the middle layer is what I call the architectural layers, the aligners, if you will. But they can drop this one piece and adapt this same piece or a modified version of level 3 from a different vendor. I'm just going to give this example and stop here. I believe you understand me. So that's why I think Futocracy is well designed for more of a shared economy that we're getting into, versus this is me, I'm the organization, these are my resources, these are the hard line boundaries, and designing this is within my boundaries.
Okay.
By shared, I'm reading a highly interconnected economy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in which case, you're having more partnerships that are strategic as well as operational. You're thinking about working. You're thinking more cooperatively than competitively, but at the same time, you're balancing competition and cooperation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it changes, constantly changing.
Right. And again, the key thing to Futocracy is that we were focusing initially on new ways to approach organizational change. And as we got into it, we realized that we were looking at the problem from the wrong perspective, and that the organization structure itself, by being built on control, was fighting any attempt for change. And we needed to step back and rethink about what would be done different if you started from blank field and designed an organization built for work and not built for control. What would you do different? And that's where we got into effectuation as a key component, because to an extent, a startup faces many constraints, but keeps moving much quicker and doesn't get bogged down.
Right. Oh, I believe it will work in that setup, and I think that's the way to go. But I also believe that it becomes more powerful as a model, Futocracy, if we start to embrace more of a networked economy. Let me use the word networked economy more than a shared economy.
Yep.
Because the organization, I mean, at some point you're going to get to that level 3, and I'm not sure all my terminology is aligned correctly and I'm using the right words, but you can get to that level 3, which is a unit of work. And if today I can do the unit of work in China, for example, that is making me excellent, return on investment, but tomorrow I can shift that exact unit of work and do it in Peru, and it's outsourced to me, then why shouldn't I?
Yeah. If I can come in for a second here, Joseph. One of the things that I'll be discussing on the 19th of May when we look at the people side is this whole notion of what outsourcing means. And if we go back to, I don't know, only 10 years ago, the whole driver for outsourcing was basically to reduce the manpower or number of people in the organization, to reduce cost and increase shareholder value. And the enterprise systems and the technology of that time was very different to what we have today. So we ended up with maybe a call center in India, another part of the organization in China, and so on, with little or no flexibility and very, very strict constraints of what outsourcing meant. Now we're into a world of the circular economy. We're into a world that has very, very different technology. So my view is we have to revisit this whole concept of what does outsourcing mean in today's world? Is it still about saving the number of people in the organization and the cost involved? Or is it about achieving a more effective business? And if we come from the latter point of view, we view the nature of work very differently, and the type of role that outsourcing has will also be very different. And then that links into your comment about the networked economy, because we have that flexibility that we can achieve that.
Yeah, I think so. And I'll more than likely join the session. I'm very much interested in seeing how this all comes together, especially as we now move into an even newer flavor, for the lack of better words, that is coming to my mind at the moment, because it's going to be, are you outsourcing are you considering how green you are in that outsourcing equation as well.
Absolutely. The whole equation changes.
Right. You know, if I'm going to have to transfer parcels all around the world and I'm going to outsource that, for example, business to FedEx or UPS, then really those carbon credits that I'm outsourcing, who is responsible? You got the flow. But anyway, I'll pause here. I do believe Futocracy can lend itself well into, from what I can tell, initial, you know, tone the water kind of feel to that network model.
To a large extent, when you talk about the networked economy, that's not necessarily a new concept either.
Right.
A lot of what we've discovered are old thoughts that have not really fully evolved or integrated. The issue of the boundaryless organization goes back decades now, but it's difficult to do if each one is thought about as a separate entity and not with the mindset of linking not only internally, but linking externally for partnership and sharing.
Yeah. It's a
Good,
matter of
thank you, Joe.
control. It's a matter. I'm not even giving up. It's a matter of how does management perceive control? Is really what it boils down to.
Yeah. Well, it's exactly right, because there is still some necessity for control, but do you do the control through setting directives that limit decisions, or do you put principles in place that guide decisions, and do you then control through purpose alignment? So it's a very different thought about how you do control.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Annette, you're raising your finger there.
Sure. So, you know, just a stray thought that came through, but it's holding some presence for me, which is it almost feels like we should be using effectuating, or at least bringing in the notion of the ing, because there's sort of the active component of evolving, adapting, guiding. It's guiding and directing, not direction, not control. I don't know why it just landed in a while ago, and it still keeps flipping every time I hear what we're saying.
Yeah. No, I agree with that, in that a lot of times we talk about it being as a mindset, but it's also a mindset that's driven to action. So I agree with that.
There's no right or wrong, but it just feels like in part of the principles, I'm not saying change effectuation, that's a word, right? But part of what resonates so deeply with me is the fact that it's constantly in motion, and it's critically thinking about itself and critically acting on itself and critically partnering and reshaping partnerships. And it's not like it's a one moment, okay, these two functions are in partnership together. Well, some people may change, other things may shift, and there may be another need to rejigger some of that.
Right. And that goes back to our original thought, is that we need an organization that is truly designed for change. You don't design it and then have to reorganize it. It's in a constant rethinking of what's needed. And the critical component is that it's not treated as a one-off project or fix. It becomes a routine way of doing business. It's a routine on how you think about what you're doing. Other questions? Any other questions? George, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Joseph.
No, I'll yield for someone else, if there is.
Go ahead until somebody else comes in.
Okay. I used to work for an organization that was very, very, that constantly reorganized. And I was a mid-tier manager at that organization. And, my circle was the mid-tier management. And a lot of the decisions, just like any other, it was a technology company, just like any other technology company, grew from a small startup to become a world-class organization. And there was a lot of controls, but everybody within that mid-tier organization and your direct reports would have a lot of heartburn over the amount of reorging, the twice a year or 3 times a year. And to some degree, I would too. But then when I'd look at it from a different perspective, I found, when I sit back and think about, so where were we? Where are we now after this one reorg? And what benefit has it done? And I look at a 360, I realized that what the organization was trying to do was it was embedded in its self-organizational principles, although they may not have known that or this, is it's trying to realign itself constantly. It's like a system that the flow, and there's in a river, and then there's some stones or bricks along the way, and it's trying to go around it. And this way didn't work. Well, let me try that way. And they're measuring it through financial means. So did we succeed in the last 6 months? What do our books look like? I just wanted to use that as an example.
Now, that's something I've encountered in the past too. And there's also a saying that by the time you finish a reorganization, things have changed enough that you need to change it again.
Right.
And the key is you're always changing, but you're always trying to go to some stability, but that stability is illusionary.
Right.
I often think of the auto industry that has, for some years now, been in denial about the drivers of change and the need to change. And then along comes Elon Musk in his effectuation mindset, when everyone says you can't do it because we don't have the battery power, etc. And they give a whole shopping list of why you cannot achieve the objective of a reasonable priced electric car. And so he just says, well, let's go with what we've got. And at each obstacle he comes across, they review it and they come up with another solution, and part of that is about developing a new way of storing electricity and so forth. And so that you then get the OEMs, the main players, the big car companies realize they may have some of their market vanish. And so they've got this old structure called a car, and they put some electric bits in and some motors, and they call it a hybrid, but it's too heavy and cumbersome, and it doesn't really achieve much apart more pollution, until eventually they come to the point where you can only do so much with this hunk of metal. We've got to start from the bottom up and redesign it totally, different materials, different platform, different drivetrains, and so forth. And I see organizations are the same. They keep trying to change this thing that is a result of the industrial age, which was brilliant for the industrial age time because people came to work, they were grateful for work. But now they have opportunities to create their own work. They have a different mindset and expectation that maybe some of their parents and grandparents had but didn't talk about, but now they're very, very much saying this is what we want from life and so forth. And so we've got to this point, I think, of the Elon Musk of the auto industry. We've got that point in business where this old platform ain't any good anymore, and we've got to rethink. And Futocracy is one of those different platforms, and doesn't say it's going to be the one for the world or for every eventuality, but it is we hope the catalyst for a new way of thinking about organizations, and it's one model.
Yeah, I think a lot that's driving this, I didn't mean to jump in though, but is the way of the individual thinking process has changed. If you go back to the Industrial Revolution days, I believe, and I might be wrong on this, but that people moved, that's 100+ years ago. They want to go into an industrial Ford-like, using a car building analogy, which I love cars, by the way, way of thinking was revolutionary. Do the same process over and over again, and this will happen. And you build economies of scale and you drive costs down by doing that. Well, I believe now we're shifting more into a higher degree of individual thinking. It could be spurred by social media as well. And but we're moving more into, well, it's the collective that matter. It is a little bit of this person and a little bit of that person that matter versus, from a thought process, and then we act on it. We create what we create, or we make it, as we mentioned in the presentation. We make the future through these individual thoughts, which is a great philosophy. But now we might be more ready to embrace this way of being rather than a Ford-like assembly line. Just a thought.
Yeah, and part of it gets back to, we are deeply embedded with an industrial paradigm.
Yeah.
But if we step back, we also have to realize that everything that's in that paradigm and that we know about the industrial era and how we organized around the machines, that was all invented. And it was invented for the needs at that time. It was not invented for something that would live forever. So that we need to constantly rethink of what's needed now, and does something else need to be invented to meet today's needs?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I deal a lot with the auto industry worldwide. If you go into 98% of their factories, you'll see Fordism minus most people. Everything else is the same. It's just you've got robots dealing with things, running along lines, going up and down lifts. That's a bit different to Ford, but it's basically the same principles. There are a couple of factories where they've gone to modular approaches, which are very different thinking, which actually came from the ideas of a student doing a semester with Volkswagen, and was just asked one day, can't we do this differently? And the student came up with another way of doing it with using his IT knowledge. And this is how all the new models are going to be produced by VW in the future. And they've had to do this and move away from Fordism because the market is what Ross and I call the B to me. You had the business to business, the B2B, and the business to consumer, the B2C, which was great when you were sending out all these different products, which were pretty much the same with a few minor differences. And you can do that in traditional manufacturing processes. But now we've got the B2Me, which is all about individuality, and they all want it differently and they want it yesterday. And so we are forced in manufacturing to think more in modular terms of production and so forth. And of course, this ripples back into the organization itself. If our customers are changing significantly, our people who work with us are changing significantly in their demands, and yet we're still running this old machine that houses everything. And the two just don't go together. So I don't think organizations have got a choice. I think you'll have those that will start to think and change quickly, and then the laggards are the ones like the shops in the high street who don't know how to operate from a platform, are the ones who are closing down, not the platforms. And so I think it's a really a significant shifting point in organizational design and mindsets.
Other questions? Not hearing any questions, I could wrap up, and thank you for the questions, and we welcome any additional comments on anything that we are doing. We continue to put together ideas together in white papers, and we'll be doing additional webinars in the future. This particular one today takes care of effectuation, which is some key principles that are embedded in our thinking. But again, we came at it from what do you really need to have in an organization that is designed for routine adaptive change going forward. Okay. I'll stick around for a few more minutes. If there's any other questions, I will entertain them. Otherwise, thank you very much and have a great rest of your day. Reg, any other closing comments?
No, just if anyone else got any challenges where they think we've got it wrong, I'll be pleased to hear it, because this is what this is all about. It's trying to find out where the holes are so that we can to fill in the holes and make sure that what we're suggesting is of benefit to organizations and not a liability.
Great. Thank you very much. Everyone have a good day.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.